The afternoon sun painted Thorne's bakery in shades of amber and gold, the kind of light that made ordinary moments feel sacred. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams streaming through the front windows, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with vanilla and cinnamon, creating an atmosphere that felt less like a business and more like someone's kitchen where love had been baked into every recipe for the past 40 years. Nora Bishop sat alone at the corner table, her wheelchair positioned carefully beneath the worn wooden surface. 22 slim candles stood arranged in a perfect spiral atop a small chocolate cake, their wax already beginning to soften in the warmth. She stared at them without really seeing, her hands folded in her lap, like a child waiting for permission to exist. 22 years old today. 22 years of breathing, surviving, enduring. And here she was, celebrating alone in a bakery where the owner felt more like family than her actual father ever had in the 3 years since the accident. Her reflection stared back from the darkened screen of her phone. Pale skin that rarely saw sunlight anymore. Dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail because what was the point of anything else? Brown eyes that used to sparkle with plans and possibilities, now just tired, always so tired. She'd been beautiful once, at least people had said so, before the accident, before her mother's death 3 weeks later. Before her father became a stranger who wrote checks instead of speaking, who built empires instead of relationships, who looked at his daughter and saw only everything he'd failed to protect. The candles waited. Nora knew she should light them, should make a wish, should perform this ritual that billions of humans had performed before her. But what was there to wish for when your legs didn't work and your mother wasn't coming back and your father had become a ghost who haunted your mansion, present in body but absent in every way that mattered? Mrs. Isabel Thorne emerged from the back kitchen, her weathered face creasing into a warm smile. The elderly woman had insisted on the candles, had insisted on the singing, had insisted that birthdays mattered even when it felt like nothing else did. Now she disappeared again, giving Nora privacy for a moment that should have been joyful, but felt instead like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into everything she'd lost. Friends. She'd had those once too. Sarah, who'd promised to be there forever, who'd stopped returning calls after the 3rd month. David, her high school boyfriend, who'd said the wheelchair didn't matter right up until it did. Everyone else had drifted away gradually, their discomfort with her new reality more powerful than years of shared history. People were good at disappearing when staying became inconvenient. The bakery door chimed. Nora didn't look up. Tuesday afternoons were quiet in this part of the city, in this small shop that somehow survived despite being sandwiched between a Starbucks and a Panera. Most of Mrs. Thorne's customers were regulars, elderly neighbors who'd been coming for decades, young mothers with toddlers in tow, the occasional college student seeking authentic homemade pastries. None of them paid attention to the girl in the wheelchair who came every few weeks, always alone, always ordering something small and eating it slowly like she had nowhere else to be. Because she didn't. Nowhere else to be. Nowhere she was expected. Nowhere she was wanted. A child's voice cut through her thoughts like light through fog, high and clear and full of unfiltered joy. "Daddy, look. Someone has a birthday cake." Nora glanced up despite herself. A man stood just inside the doorway, tall and lean in a way that suggested someone who worked with his hands, who moved through the world with purpose. He wore jeans worn soft with washing of faded blue Henley work boots that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and he had the kind of face that would have been handsome if it hadn't been so obviously exhausted. Lines bracketed his mouth, carved there by either laughter or worry, or both. But his eyes were kind. That was the first thing Nora noticed. Kind eyes, the color of warm honey, currently focused on the little girl clutching his hand. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, all wild brown curls and gap-toothed smiles, wearing a purple dress that had clearly seen extensive use. She was staring at Nora's cake with the sort of reverence usually reserved for Christmas morning, her whole face lit up with excitement. The man spoke gently, his voice carrying the rough edges of someone who'd learned to be strong because he had no other choice. Reese's quiet voice inside. But he was smiling too soft and fond in a way that made Nora's chest ache with something she couldn't name, father and daughter. It was written in every gesture, every glance, every unconscious way they leaned toward each other, like gravity existed only between them. Nora had seen plenty of parents and children before, in parks she could no longer walk through, in restaurants where families gathered, in the world that moved around her like she was a stone in a river, permanent but separate. But there was something different here. Something about the way this man looked at his daughter like she was the only thing in the universe that mattered, like he would fight God himself to keep her safe. Nora's father used to look at her like that once. Before. Mrs. Thorne emerged from the back, her face creasing into recognition. "Marcus and my sweet Reese. You're early today." The man replied, his voice carrying genuine warmth beneath the fatigue. "Dentist appointment got moved. Thought we'd grab our usual and maybe a treat for this troublemaker." The girl protested, giggling in that unself-conscious way only children could manage. "Hey, I'm not trouble." "You're nothing but trouble," the man countered, but he was grinning now, ruffling her hair with such easy affection that Nora had to look away. The best kind of trouble. Mrs. Thorne was already moving toward the display case, pulling out their regular order. 2 chicken hand pies for Marcus, 1 apple turnover for Reese. Always the same. Nora had been coming here long enough to recognize the pattern, to know the rhythms of other people's lives, even as her own felt increasingly stagnant. But the little girl wasn't paying attention to food anymore. She'd turned her full attention to Nora, dark eyes wide and curious and completely without judgment. Children saw differently than adults. Nora had learned this over the past 3 years. Adults looked at the wheelchair, first made assumptions, rearranged their faces into expressions of pity or discomfort or aggressive cheerfulness that was somehow worse than pity. Children just saw a person. Sometimes they asked questions, blunt, honest questions that adults would never dare voice, but mostly they just looked and accepted and moved on. This girl wasn't moving on. "It's your birthday." Not a question, but a statement of fact delivered with the absolute certainty of childhood. Nora nodded, unsure what else to do. Her voice felt stuck somewhere between her chest and throat, trapped by years of being invisible, of being overlooked, of being the person everyone pretended not to see. "Are you having a party?" The question landed with the weight of innocence that didn't understand loneliness yet. The man's hand tightened slightly on his daughter's shoulder, a reflex of protection, but he didn't pull her back. "Reese," he started, gentle warning in his tone. "It's okay," Nora heard herself say, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "No party, just cake." The girl frowned, a small crease appearing between her eyebrows that made her look far older than 7. She looked at the single chair across from Nora's wheelchair, at the untouched cake with its waiting candles, at the absolute absence of celebration. Then she looked up at her father with an expression that was somehow both imperious and pleading. "Daddy," she said in that tone children use when they're about to request something they know might be refused but hope won't be. "Can we sit with the birthday girl? No one should eat cake alone." The world stopped. Nora felt it stop. Felt the moment stretch and expand like blown glass, fragile and shimmering and dangerous. She stared at this child she'd never met, this small person who'd looked at her solitude and decided it was unacceptable, who'd seen a stranger's loneliness and chosen to care. The man's eyes met Nora's, and she saw the question there, the uncertainty, the genuine concern that his daughter might be overstepping. He was giving her an out, a chance to refuse politely, to retreat back into her safe isolation. Nora should have taken it, should have smiled and said no thank you, and let them go to their own table, their own world that didn't include broken girls in wheelchairs who'd forgotten how to be around people. That would have been easier, safer, the choice she'd been making for 3 years. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was different. "I'd like that." The girl's face transformed into pure sunshine. Before Nora could blink, she'd climbed into the chair across from her, her purple dress poofing out around her like a flower. The man followed more slowly, lowering himself into the seat with the careful movements of someone whose body had learned the cost of carelessness. Up close, Nora could see the calluses on his hands, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical labor. This was a man who'd survived something, who understood loss in a way most people didn't. "I'm Reese," the little girl announced, like this was the beginning of something important and everyone should pay attention. "I'm 7. This is my daddy. His name is Marcus, but sometimes I call him Silly Daddy because he makes funny faces." "I do not make funny faces," Marcus protested, but he was smiling again, that soft smile that seemed reserved entirely for his daughter. "You do, though?" Reese insisted. Then she turned back to Nora expectantly. "What's your name, Nora?" she managed, and was rewarded with Reese's gap-toothed grin. "That's a princess name," Reese declared with absolute authority. "Like from the old stories Mrs. Patterson reads us." Do you know those stories?" "Some of them," Nora said quietly. Her mother had read them to her once years ago, back when her legs worked and the world was full of possibilities instead of limitations. Back when happy endings felt possible instead of like cruel jokes. "Do you like cake?" Reese was still talking, her energy endless and infectious. "I love cake. Daddy makes me cake sometimes, but it's not as good as bakery cake." "No offense, Daddy." "None taken," Marcus said dryly. He met Nora's eyes again, and this time there was something apologetic in his expression. "Sorry," he started to say. "She's perfect," Nora interrupted, surprising herself again. "She's perfect." And she was. Reese was everything Nora had forgotten existed. Unfiltered joy, uncomplicated kindness, the ability to see what was needed and simply do it without second-guessing or social anxiety or fear of rejection. She was a 7-year-old force of nature in a purple dress, and Nora felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years. Mrs. Thorne arrived with Marcus and Reese's order, but also with plates and forks and napkins for 3. She caught Nora's eye and smiled a knowing look that said, "Birthdays matter," then retreated without a word. "Can we sing?" Reese asked, bouncing slightly in her seat. "You have to have singing on your birthday. It's the law." "Is it?" Nora asked, feeling the corner of her mouth twitch upward in something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Oh yes," Reese said seriously, "a very important law. Daddy, we have to sing." Marcus looked at Nora, that question still in his eyes, still giving her permission to say no to protect her privacy, to maintain her solitude. But Nora found she didn't want to say no. Didn't want to be alone anymore. Not right now. Not when this impossible child had decided Nora's birthday mattered. "Okay," Nora whispered. Reese didn't need to be told twice. She sucked in a deep breath and launched into the most enthusiastic off-key rendition of Happy Birthday Nora had ever heard. Marcus joined in, his voice a warm baritone that somehow made the simple song sound like something worth hearing. Mrs. Thorne's voice floated from behind the counter. Even the elderly man in the far corner, a regular Nora had seen but never spoken to, added his wavering tenor to the mix. It was ridiculous. It was embarrassing. It was the most beautiful thing that had happened to Nora in 3 years. When they finished, Reese clapped her hands together with pure delight. "Make a wish. Make a good one." Nora closed her eyes. "What did you wish for when you'd stopped believing wishes could come true? What did you ask for when you'd already lost everything that mattered? The accident had taken her legs. Her mother's guilt had taken her life. Her father's grief had taken him somewhere Nora couldn't follow. I wish I wasn't alone, she thought. Just for today, just for this moment. I wish I wasn't invisible. She blew out the candles. All 22 flames extinguished in one breath, and Reese cheered like Nora had just performed a miracle. What did you wish for? The little girl asked immediately. If I tell you it won't come true, Nora said. But she was smiling now, really smiling, and it felt like using muscles she'd forgotten she had. That's probably not real, Reese said thoughtfully. But okay, can I have cake? They ate together. 3 strangers sharing chocolate cake and hand pies in a quiet bakery, while the golden afternoon light slowly shifted toward evening. Reese talked constantly, a running commentary on everything from her favorite books to the injustice of bedtimes to the weird smell in her classroom. Marcus listened with the patience of someone who'd heard these stories before, but still found them fascinating, occasionally interjecting with questions or gentle corrections. And Nora just listened, just existed in this bubble of normalcy of family, of what life looked like when people actually cared about each other. She watched the way Marcus automatically cut Reese's turnover into smaller pieces without being asked, the way Reese leaned against her father's arm while she ate, the 1,000 tiny gestures that said I love you without words. So what do you do, Nora? Marcus asked eventually, his voice careful, like he wasn't sure if conversation was welcome or intrusive. The question froze her. What did she do? She existed. She occupied space in her father's mansion. She went to physical therapy appointments that never seemed to help. She read books and watched movies and counted the hours until she could sleep again, until another day was over and she was one day closer to what? She didn't even know anymore. I'm between things, she said finally, which was technically true, if by between things you meant completely adrift and purposeless. Marcus nodded like this made perfect sense, like he wasn't judging her for not having a career or ambitions or any of the markers of successful young adulthood. I get that. Took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do after—" He stopped, glanced at Reese, adjusted his sentence. "After some changes in my life." "What do you do?" Nora asked, genuinely curious now. "I'm a carpenter," he said, and there was quiet pride in his voice. "Custom furniture, mostly. Built-ins, cabinets, that sort of thing. Not glamorous, but I like working with my hands. Like seeing something go from an idea to something real and useful. Daddy makes beautiful things." Reese added a bit of chocolate frosting on her chin. "He made my bookshelf and it has flowers carved on it and everything." "She's biased," Marcus said, but he was smiling again, that soft expression that transformed his tired face into something approaching happy. "I bet it's beautiful," Nora said, and meant it. There was something appealing about the idea of creating something tangible, something that would last, something that served a purpose. Her life felt like the opposite: intangible, temporary, purposeless. "What about your family?" Reese asked with the directness that only children could pull off. "Are they coming to your party?" The question landed like a physical blow. Nora felt her smile falter, felt the walls start to reconstruct themselves brick by brick. "It's just me and my dad," she said carefully. "And he's busy with work." "What kind of work?" Reese pressed, oblivious to the sudden tension in Nora's shoulders. "Reese," Marcus said gently, a quiet warning. But Nora found herself answering anyway. "He runs a tech company, Bishop Technologies." She watched Marcus's face shift slightly, recognition dawning. Of course he knew the name. Everyone in the city knew Bishop Technologies, knew Garrett Bishop, the self-made billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing. What they didn't know was that he'd sacrificed his family to do it, that he'd chosen success over connection, that his daughter lived in a mansion and felt more alone than any homeless person on the street. "That's impressive," Marcus said neutrally, and Nora appreciated that he didn't gush or get weird or suddenly treat her differently. "It's something," Nora replied, which was the most diplomatic way she could describe the empire that had swallowed her father whole. "My daddy doesn't have a company," Reese announced, "but he makes me pancakes on Sundays and reads me stories every night, and those are better than companies." Nora's throat tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. "Yeah," she whispered, "those sound a lot better." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt natural between people who'd somehow skipped past the awkward stranger phase straight into something that felt almost like friendship. Nora couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this normal, seen this like a person instead of a problem. "Do you come here often?" Marcus asked eventually. "To the bakery?" Nora nodded. "It's my favorite place in the city." "Mrs. Thorne is kind. She's the best," Marcus agreed. "We've been coming here since Reese was 3. It's our Tuesday tradition, after school before dinner. Just us two." "Tradition is important," Nora said softly, thinking about all the traditions her family used to have. Sunday morning pancakes, her mother's recipe with blueberries from the farmer's market. Friday movie nights, just the 3 of them piled on the couch with popcorn and blankets. Her father reading her stories before bed, doing all the voices, making her laugh until her stomach hurt. All gone now, swept away by tragedy and grief and her father's inability to sit with pain without drowning it in work. "Are you okay?" Reese asked suddenly, her small face creased with concern. "You look sad." Marcus started to intervene, but Nora shook her head. "I'm okay. Sometimes birthdays make you think about things, you know." Reese nodded sagely, like she understood completely. Like 7 years of life had given her deep wisdom about the bittersweet nature of marking time. "When it's my birthday, I think about my mama. She's not here anymore, but Daddy says she's watching from heaven, and she's proud of me." The air left Nora's lungs. She looked at Marcus and saw grief there, old and worn, but still sharp around the edges, still painful when touched. A widower. He was a widower, raising his daughter alone, and suddenly the exhaustion in his face made perfect sense, as did the fierce love in every glance at Reese, the protective hand that never strayed far from her shoulder. "I'm sorry," Nora said, inadequate words for enormous loss. "Me too," Reese said matter-of-factly. "It's okay to be sad and happy at the same time. Daddy taught me that. You can miss someone and still have a good day." This child, this impossible, wonderful child, who somehow understood emotional complexity better than most adults, Nora knew. She wanted to scoop Reese up and hold her tight, wanted to protect her from every hurt the world would inevitably inflict. Wanted to thank her for existing, for sitting down, for deciding that Nora's loneliness was unacceptable. "Your daddy is very smart," Nora said, her voice thick. "I know," Reese said confidently. Then she yawned, a jaw-cracking yawn that made her look even younger than 7. "We should probably head home," Marcus said, glancing at his watch. "Get this one fed and bathed before she falls asleep in her dinner." "I won't fall asleep in my dinner," Reese protested, but she was already leaning heavier against her father, eyelids drooping. Panic fluttered in Nora's chest. They were leaving. This strange, wonderful interlude was ending, and she'd go back to being alone, to being invisible, to existing without anyone noticing. The thought was unbearable. "Thank you," she said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "For sitting with me, for making this birthday, for making it matter." Marcus's expression softened into something Nora couldn't quite read. "Thank you for letting us crash your party, and for being so kind to my chatty daughter." "I liked the chatty daughter," Nora said, smiling at Reese, who beamed back sleepily. They stood, Marcus gathering their things, Reese clutching her father's hand, both of them preparing to walk out of Nora's life forever. But at the door, Reese turned back. "Will you be here next Tuesday? At our tradition time?" Nora's heart stuttered. The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown across dark water. I could be." "Then we'll see you next Tuesday," Reese declared, like it was decided, like Nora's presence was now a permanent fixture in their tradition. She looked up at her father. "Right, Daddy." Marcus met Nora's eyes across the bakery, and she saw the question there again, the offer of friendship from a stranger who had no reason to care but somehow did anyway. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll see you next Tuesday, Nora." They left father and daughter walking into the evening hand in hand, and Nora sat in the golden light watching them go. The cake was mostly gone. The candles melted into colorful puddles of wax. Mrs. Thorne came out to clear the table, pausing to squeeze Nora's shoulder gently. "Good birthday," the older woman asked. Nora thought about it, about the loneliness that had brought her here, about the unexpected gift of company, about a 7-year-old in a purple dress who'd decided Nora mattered. She thought about next Tuesday, about the possibility of not being alone, about strangers who could become friends if you were brave enough to let them. "Yeah," she said, and her smile was real. "A really good birthday." That night, Nora sat in her bedroom in the Bishop mansion, a room bigger than most people's apartments, filled with expensive furniture and emptiness. Her father was in his study as always, probably on a conference call with London or Tokyo or somewhere else that mattered more than his daughter's birthday. He'd transferred money to her account like he always did. No card, no call, just zeros in a bank account, his version of love. But Nora didn't feel quite as empty as usual. She kept thinking about Reese's gap-toothed smile, about Marcus's kind eyes, about the way they'd looked at her and seen a person instead of a problem. She thought about next Tuesday, about the possibility that had bloomed in her chest like something fragile and necessary. Maybe wishes didn't come true in the magical way fairy tales promised. Maybe you didn't close your eyes and blow out candles and wake up with your legs working and your mother alive and your father capable of connection. But maybe wishes came true in smaller ways, in the form of a little girl who decided you shouldn't celebrate alone, in the offer of friendship from a stranger, in the knowledge that someone somewhere had noticed your loneliness and cared enough to sit down. Nora picked up her phone, pulled up her calendar, and marked next Tuesday with a single word: bakery. For the first time in 3 years, she had something to look forward to. Across the city, in a small apartment above a hardware store, Marcus Holloway tucked his daughter into bed. Reese was already mostly asleep, her purple dress discarded on the floor, her hair a wild tangle across her pillow. He smoothed it back gently, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Daddy," she murmured, eyes fluttering half open. "Yeah, baby. I'm glad we sat with Nora. She seemed really lonely." Marcus's chest tightened. 3 years since Juliet died. 3 years of raising Reese alone. 3 years of teaching her to be kind, to notice people who were hurting, to lead with compassion instead of judgment. Moments like this made him think maybe he was doing something right. "I'm glad too. You did a good thing today, noticing she needed company." "Will we really see her next Tuesday?" Reese asked, fighting sleep. "If she comes, we'll see her," Marcus promised. "She'll come," Reese said with absolute certainty. "She needs friends. Everyone needs friends." She was asleep before Marcus could respond, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. He sat there for a long moment watching her, this perfect person he and Juliet had made, this embodiment of everything good in a world that could be so cruel. He thought about Nora Bishop because of course he knew who she was, who her father was, the tragedy that had reshaped her life 3 years ago. The accident had been all over the news. Garrett Bishop's daughter paralyzed. Garrett Bishop's wife dead from guilt or grief or both. The city had talked about nothing else for weeks. But sitting across from her in the bakery, Marcus hadn't seen a tragedy or a headline or a rich man's broken daughter. He'd seen a young woman who was desperately lonely, who'd forgotten how to smile, who'd looked at his daughter like Reese was performing some kind of miracle just by existing. He'd seen someone who needed exactly what Reese was offering: uncomplicated friendship, no strings attached, no judgment or pity or discomfort with her wheelchair. Juliet would have liked her, he thought. Juliet had always had a gift for seeing people's hearts, for looking past the surface to the truth underneath. She would have seen Nora's loneliness and done exactly what Reese had done: sat down, offered company, made space in their lives for someone who needed belonging. "I'm trying, Jules," he whispered into the darkness, the same prayer he offered every night. "I'm trying to raise her the way you would have wanted. I'm trying to teach her your kindness." The apartment was silent except for Reese's breathing and the distant sound of traffic. No answer came from heaven or anywhere else, because the dead didn't speak no matter how much you needed them to. But Marcus could almost feel Juliet's approval, could almost hear her voice saying, "You did good today, letting our daughter be kind." He stood, turned off Reese's light, and closed her door most of the way. She didn't like it completely shut, afraid of missing something important in the night. In his own room, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment before opening his calendar and typing a single reminder: Tuesday. Bakery. Nora. He wasn't sure what he was doing, befriending a girl young enough to be his younger sister, rich enough to buy his entire apartment building without noticing, living in a world so different from his own they might as well be different species. But Reese had decided Nora mattered, and Marcus had learned to trust his daughter's instincts about people. If she thought Nora needed friends, then Nora probably needed friends. And if he was honest, painfully reluctantly honest, Marcus was lonely too. 3 years of being a single father, of every conversation revolving around children's needs, of adult companionship limited to brief exchanges with clients or other exhausted parents at school pickup. He loved Reese more than life itself, but sometimes he missed having someone to talk to who could discuss things beyond books and playground politics. Maybe Nora needed friends. Maybe Marcus did too. Maybe Reese, in her 7-year-old wisdom, had seen what both of them needed and decided to fix it with the simple act of asking to sit down. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Millions of people living separate lives, passing each other without connecting, alone together in the same space. But somewhere in that vast landscape of loneliness, 2 people had found each other, brought together by a little girl in a purple dress and a birthday cake no one else had come to share. It was a small beginning, a fragile thread of connection in a world designed to keep people isolated. But small beginnings could grow into something larger, could become the foundation of something that mattered. Next Tuesday would tell them if this moment was just a moment, or if it was the first page of a story neither of them knew they needed to write. The following Tuesday arrived with the weight of anticipation Nora hadn't felt in years. She woke early, which itself was unusual. Most mornings she stayed in bed until noon, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, avoiding the day because the day held nothing worth waiting for. But this morning was different. This morning held possibility. She spent an hour choosing what to wear, which was ridiculous. It was just the bakery. Just Mrs. Thorne's modest little shop where she'd been going for months without caring what she looked like. But today mattered. Today, Marcus and Reese might be there, might sit with her again, might prove that last week wasn't just a beautiful accident, but the beginning of something real. Nora settled on a soft blue sweater her mother had bought her years ago, back when they used to shop together, when Catherine would hold up clothes and say, "This brings out your eyes, sweetheart." The memory hurt sharp and familiar, but she wore the sweater anyway. Let it hurt. At least hurt meant she could still feel something. The Bishop mansion was quiet as always when Nora rolled through its marble halls. Her father had already left for the office. 6 in the morning every day, without fail, home after 10 most nights. They lived in the same house but existed in different dimensions, their paths crossing only in the physical space they shared, never in any way that mattered. James, the butler, who'd been with the family since before the accident, was waiting by the car. He was 60-something, efficient and kind, one of the few employees who'd stayed after Catherine's death, when so many others had quietly disappeared, unable to handle the grief that permeated every room. "Thorne's Bakery," he asked, starting the engine. "How did you know? You've been going on Tuesdays." Pattern recognition. Nora wondered what else he'd noticed, what patterns her life had fallen into that were visible to anyone paying attention. Tuesday bakery trips. Wednesday physical therapy that never helped. Friday visits to her mother's grave. The rest of the week just empty space hours to fill with books and movies and the careful management of not thinking too hard about how little her life meant. "Thank you, James." "My pleasure, Miss Nora." The drive across the city took 30 minutes, moving from the manicured wealth of her father's neighborhood into areas where people actually lived instead of just resided. Nora watched the progression from mansions to nice houses to apartments to the mixed commercial residential area where Thorne's Bakery sat wedged between corporate chains that should have put it out of business years ago. James helped her into her wheelchair, asked what time she wanted pickup, and drove away. Nora sat outside the bakery for a long moment, suddenly terrified. What if they didn't come? What if Reese had forgotten, or Marcus had decided befriending his daughter's random birthday stranger was weird, or they'd simply moved on because that's what people did. They moved on while Nora stayed frozen in place. But she'd come this far. She pushed through the door. Mrs. Thorne looked up from behind the counter and smiled the kind of smile that said, "I know something you don't know yet." The bakery was warm and smelled of fresh bread and something sweet baking in the back. Tuesday afternoon, quiet as always. Just the same elderly man from last week reading a newspaper in the corner. "Your usual table is open?" Mrs. Thorne said, gesturing to the corner where Nora had sat alone 7 days ago. Nora ordered tea and a blueberry scone, more for something to do with her hands than because she was hungry. She positioned her wheelchair at the table and waited, trying not to watch the clock, trying not to count the minutes, trying not to let hope become the enemy of peace. 3:30 came and went. Then 3:45. Nora's tea grew cold. The scone sat untouched. Maybe they weren't coming. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe the door chimed. "Nora!" Reese burst through the entrance like a small tornado, still in her school uniform. This time, navy jumper and white shirt, her wild curls barely contained by a headband. She ran straight to Nora's table with no hesitation, no shyness, just pure joy at seeing a friend. Behind her, Marcus followed more slowly, his carpenter's tool bag slung over one shoulder, sawdust still visible on his jeans. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that came from physical labor and single parenthood, and carrying weight that never got lighter. But when his eyes found Nora's, he smiled, and it transformed his face into something approaching peaceful. "I told Daddy we had to hurry. I told him you'd be waiting and we couldn't be late for our friend." Our friend. Such simple words, such enormous meaning. "I'm glad you came," Nora managed, and her voice only shook a little. "Of course we came," Reese declared like the alternative was unthinkable. "It's Tuesday. Tuesday is bakery day now. With you." Marcus settled into his seat with a slight groan, rolling his shoulders like they'd been carrying heavy things all day. "Sorry we're a bit late. Job ran long. It's fine. I'm just happy you're here." And she was. Happy in a way she'd forgotten was possible, in a way that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. These people owed her nothing. They barely knew her. But they'd shown up anyway, had remembered, had decided that their Tuesday tradition now included a lonely girl in a wheelchair who had nowhere else to be. Mrs. Thorne arrived with Marcus and Reese's usual order, the hand pies they'd had last week, plus fresh hot tea for everyone. She winked at Nora before retreating, and Nora felt a rush of affection for this woman who'd been witness to her loneliness for months, and had quietly, without fanfare, helped orchestrate this small miracle. "How was your week?" Marcus asked, his tone careful, like he wasn't sure how much conversation was welcome versus intrusive. Nora almost said fine, because that's what you said, that's the social script. But something about the genuine interest in his eyes, about Reese's eager attention, made her want to tell the truth. Lonely. But better knowing today was coming. Marcus's expression softened with understanding that could only come from someone who'd walked through his own valley of isolation. "I get that. Sometimes the anticipation of good things is what gets you through the hard days." "Tell Nora about the bookshelf," Daddy Reese urged, bouncing slightly in her seat. "Tell her about the mean lady." "She wasn't mean, Reese. She was just—" Marcus paused, reconsidering. Okay, she was a little mean. Client wanted a custom built-in for her home office, very specific about every detail. I spent 2 weeks building exactly what she asked for, and when I installed it yesterday she said it wasn't what she wanted at all. Even though it was exactly what she said, Reese added indignantly. Daddy showed me the drawings and everything. People are complicated, but we worked it out. She's paying me to modify it, so at least there's that. Nora watched him talk about his work, noticed how his hands moved as he described the bookshelf, how his whole demeanor shifted when discussing something he'd created. There was pride there, and satisfaction, and the kind of purpose Nora envied. He made things tangible, things that would exist long after he was gone, things that served a function and brought beauty into the world. What did Nora do? What would she leave behind? Nothing. She was a parasite living off her father's money, contributing nothing, mattering to no one. What about you? Marcus asked, pulling her from the spiral. What do you do with your time? It was the same question he'd asked last week, and Nora still didn't have a good answer. I read a lot. And I used to paint before. She didn't finish the sentence. Before the accident. Before her mother died. Before her life became this small, contained thing that fit entirely within the walls of her father's mansion. Used to. The gentleness in Marcus's voice was almost her undoing. Why'd you stop? I don't know. I just stopped. Everything stopped after the accident. Reese, who'd been listening with the focused attention of childhood, suddenly reached across the table and took Nora's hand. Her small fingers were warm and sticky from the hand pie, and the gesture was so unexpected, so full of uncomplicated compassion that Nora's throat tightened. My teacher says it's never too late to start something again, even if you stopped for a long time. She stopped playing piano for 10 years, and then she started again, and now she plays at church. Your teacher sounds smart. She is. She's my favorite. Except for Daddy. Daddy is my most favorite. I'm honored, Marcus replied dryly. But he was looking at his daughter with such naked love that Nora had to look away. It hurt too much seeing what she'd lost, what her father used to feel for her, before grief and guilt turned him into a stranger. They talked while they ate, easy conversation that flowed naturally despite them being essentially strangers. Reese did most of the talking, endless stories about school and friends and a boy named Timothy who kept pulling her hair at recess. Marcus interjected occasionally with gentle corrections or questions, guiding his daughter's narrative without stifling her enthusiasm, and Nora just listened, soaking it up like someone dying of thirst, this glimpse into normal life, normal family, normal connection. Do you have brothers or sisters? Reese asked eventually, working her way through a list of questions that seemed important to her understanding of who Nora was. No, just me. What about you? Reese shook her head, and suddenly her young face was shadowed with an understanding too mature for 7 years old. Just me, too. Mama wanted more babies, but then she got sick, and she trailed off, unable to finish. Reese's mama had cancer, Marcus said quietly, his voice carefully neutral, like he'd practiced talking about this in a way that wouldn't break him. She fought hard for almost 2 years, made it to Reese's 5th birthday before he didn't need to finish. The end of that sentence was written in the grief that still lingered in his eyes, in the way he held his daughter just a little tighter in the absence that shaped their family of 2. I'm sorry, both of you. I'm so sorry. Mama's in heaven now, Reese said matter-of-factly. She doesn't hurt anymore, and she can see me whenever she wants. Daddy says she's watching us all the time. I bet she's proud of you. You're pretty amazing. Reese beamed, then looked at Marcus with something like conspiracy in her eyes. Daddy says that too. He says Mama gave me all her best parts before she left. Marcus's eyes were suddenly very bright, and he cleared his throat roughly. Yeah, well, your mama was the best person I ever met, so that makes you pretty spectacular. The moment hung there, tender and painful and beautiful all at once. Nora felt privileged to witness it, to be trusted with this glimpse into their grief and love and the family they'd rebuilt from tragedy. But she also felt the vast difference between their loss and hers. Marcus and Reese talked about Juliet with love. They honored her memory, kept her present in their daily lives, turned their grief into something that connected them rather than separated them. Nora's father had done the opposite. He'd buried Catherine in silence, had forbidden discussion of the accident, had locked away photos and memories like they were too dangerous to touch. Grief had turned him into a ghost, and Nora into a ghost too, both of them haunting the mansion separately, never together. What about your mama? Reese asked with the directness that only children could manage without causing offense. Does she come to the bakery too? Nora felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the grief that never quite healed that lived just beneath her sternum like a permanent bruise. My mama died too, 3 years ago, same time as my accident. She watched understanding dawn on Marcus's face, watched him piece together the timeline, the accident that had paralyzed her, the mother who'd died shortly after the father who'd responded by disappearing into work. He didn't ask for details, didn't press, just nodded like he understood that some stories were too painful to tell to near strangers in bakeries. Then we both have mamas in heaven, Heiress declared like this created a special bond between them. They probably know each other. They probably talk about us. The image made Nora smile despite the ache in her chest. I bet they do. I bet they're friends. Best friends, Heiress said with certainty. And they're happy we're friends too. Were they friends? Nora wanted to ask. Could you become friends with people you'd only met twice? People who knew almost nothing about you except that you were lonely and disabled and desperate for connection. But Heiress seemed to think friendship was just a decision. You made a choice to care about someone simple as that. Maybe she was right. Maybe friendship didn't require years of history or deep knowledge or perfect compatibility. Maybe it just required showing up, sitting down, and deciding that someone's loneliness mattered. They stayed until the bakery's other customers filtered out, until Mrs. Thorne started her closing routine, until the golden afternoon light shifted toward the blue-gray of early evening. They talked about everything and nothing. Heiress's upcoming dance recital, Marcus's next project, Nora's favorite books, the best princesses in stories, a topic on which Heiress had very strong opinions. And for those hours, Nora forgot to be lonely, forgot to count all the ways her life was broken, forgot everything except the simple joy of being with people who seemed to enjoy her company, who laughed at her awkward jokes, who included her without making it feel like charity. When they finally stood to leave, Nora felt the familiar panic rising. Another week until Tuesday. 7 days of emptiness before this again. She wasn't sure she could survive. It wasn't sure she could go back to her silent mansion and her absent father and the crushing weight of all that solitude. Same time next week, Heiress asked like it was already decided, like Nora was now a permanent fixture in their Tuesday tradition. I'd like that, Nora said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. It's a date then. Marcus seemed to realize how that sounded and quickly amended. I mean, not a date, just a friend date, a bakery date, as friends. He was blushing now, stumbling over words, and Nora found it endearing, this grown man flustered by accidental implications, trying so hard to maintain appropriate boundaries. I know what you meant. And yes, I'll be here. Same time. Heiress hugged her, then just launched herself at Nora's wheelchair and wrapped small arms around her neck, squeezing tight. Nora froze for a moment, not used to being touched anymore, not used to casual affection. But then she relaxed into it, hugged this little girl back, breathed in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. You're my best grown-up friend. After Daddy. Nora's eyes burned. You're my best friend too, she whispered back, and it was true. Pathetic maybe that her best friend was a 7-year-old she'd known for 2 weeks, but true nonetheless. They left together, Marcus holding the door for Nora's wheelchair, Heiress chattering about something she wanted to show Nora next week. James was already waiting, punctual as always, and he helped Nora transfer to the car, while Marcus and Heiress walked to their own vehicle, an older sedan that had definitely seen better days. As James drove away, Nora turned to look back at the bakery. Marcus was strapping Heiress into her car seat, and even from a distance Nora could see the care in every movement, the way he checked the buckles twice, the way he smoothed Heiress's hair back from her forehead before closing the door. That was what love looked like. Active, present, consistent. Not money in a bank account, not expensive gifts and empty rooms, not a father who couldn't bear to look at you because you reminded him of everything he'd failed to protect. When Nora got home, the mansion was dark except for the light in her father's study. She could see his silhouette through the frosted glass, hunched over his desk, probably on yet another call, building his empire, while his daughter existed in the rooms around him, like a ghost. She rolled past without stopping, went to her room, closed the door. On her nightstand was a photo she kept face down most of the time because it hurt too much to look at. But tonight she picked it up, turned it over. Nora at 19, standing between her parents at her high school graduation. Her mother's arm around her waist, her father's hand on her shoulder, all three of them smiling like they believed the future held nothing but good things. So much hope in that photo, so much innocence about how quickly everything could shatter. 10 months later, Nora would be in a wheelchair. 2 weeks after that, her mother would be dead, and her father would disappear into work like it was the only grief management strategy he knew. "I miss you," Nora whispered to her mother's frozen smile. "I miss you so much, and I don't know how to keep doing this without you." The photo didn't answer. The dead never did. But Nora kept talking anyway, telling her mother about Marcus and Reese, about the bakery on Tuesdays, about feeling less alone than she had in 3 years. She talked until the words ran out, until exhaustion pulled her under, until sleep offered temporary escape from the ache of missing someone who was never coming back. The weeks became a pattern. Every Tuesday, Nora and Marcus and Reese met at Thorne's Bakery. Every Tuesday they sat together and talked and ate and existed in a bubble of friendship that felt increasingly necessary to Nora's survival. She started counting down the days, 6 days until Tuesday, 5 days, 4. She started planning things, to tell them stories, to share questions, to ask. Started existing more fully because she had witnesses to that existence, people who would notice if she disappeared. By the 4th week, Reese had started bringing drawings to show Nora elaborate crayon masterpieces depicting princesses and dragons and families. By the 5th week, Marcus was asking Nora's opinion on design decisions for his projects, showing her sketches on his phone, treating her like someone whose thoughts mattered. By the 6th week, they'd started texting between Tuesdays. Nothing heavy, just small check-ins. Reese wanting to share something funny from school. Marcus sending a photo of a completed bookshelf that Nora had helped him think through. And slowly, carefully, Nora started to come back to life. She started painting again. Just watercolors at first. Nothing serious, but the act of creating something felt revolutionary after 3 years of consuming nothing but books and screen time. She mentioned it to Marcus one Tuesday, and the following week, he brought her a set of professional-grade brushes. "I don't know anything about painting," he said, handing over the gift with the awkwardness of someone unused to such gestures. "But the guy at the art store said these were good. If they're not right, I can exchange them. They're perfect." Nora turned the brushes over in her hands, feeling the weight of someone caring enough to pay attention, to remember to spend money he probably couldn't easily spare on making her happy. "Daddy spent forever picking them out," Reese added proudly. "We went to 3 different stores." Nora looked up at Marcus and saw color in his cheeks, saw him duck his head like he was embarrassed to be caught being thoughtful, and something shifted in her chest. Something that felt dangerous and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. She was falling in love with him. No, that wasn't quite right, wasn't quite complete. She was falling in love with both of them. With Reese's uninhibited affection, with Marcus's quiet kindness, with the family they'd built from tragedy, with the space they'd made for her in their lives. She was falling in love with Tuesdays, with the bakery that smelled like home, with Mrs. Thorne, who always knew exactly what everyone needed. She was falling in love with the version of herself that existed in their presence, the Nora who laughed and talked and created and felt like maybe life was worth living after all. It was the best thing that had happened to her in 3 years. It was also the most dangerous, because Nora lived in a different world than Marcus and Reese. She lived in a mansion with a father who controlled everything, who monitored her life, who had opinions about who she should associate with. She lived in wealth that separated her from normal people, normal problems, normal relationships. She lived in the shadow of Garrett Bishop's expectations, and those expectations definitely didn't include befriending a widowed carpenter and his 7-year-old daughter. Not that her father knew about them. Nora had been careful, had kept Tuesday's secret, had told James not to mention the bakery trips to Garrett. It wasn't hard. Garrett barely asked about her life anyway, barely seemed to notice she existed except as an obligation to feed and house and pay medical bills for. But secrets had a way of coming to light eventually. And Nora lived in fear of the day her father discovered this small, perfect thing she'd built and destroyed it the way he destroyed everything that made her happy. "You seem different lately," James commented one Tuesday as he drove her to the bakery. "Happier." Nora smiled, watching the city pass by outside her window. "I am happier. It's good to see Miss Nora. Your mother would be pleased." The mention of her mother sent the usual spike of grief through Nora's chest, but it was softer now, less sharp. "I think she would be. I think she'd like my friends. I'm sure she would." At the bakery, Reese was already waiting outside, pressed against the window, her face lighting up when she saw James's car approach. By the time James had helped Nora into her wheelchair, Reese was already there, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Nora, guess what? I have something to ask you." "Let her get inside first," Marcus said, appearing behind his daughter. He looked tired today, more than usual shadows under his eyes that suggested not enough sleep. But he smiled when he saw Nora, that soft smile that made her feel seen, and her heart did its now familiar flutter. Inside, they settled at their usual table. Mrs. Thorne brought their orders without being asked, knowing their preferences by now, having started preparing their food as soon as she saw them approaching. There was something lovely about being known like that, about having preferences that someone remembered, about being expected and welcomed. "Okay, ask her now," Marcus told Reese once they were settled. Reese took a deep breath like she was preparing for something momentous. "My dance recital is next Saturday and I want you to come and watch me dance, and Daddy said I could ask if you wanted to, and do you want to?" The words came out in a rush, barely pausing for breath, and Nora felt her chest constrict with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Reese wanted her there, wanted her at something important, something special, wanted Nora to be part of her life beyond Tuesday afternoons. "I would love to come. Really? You really want to? Really? Truly? Really? Truly? I can't wait to see you dance." Reese threw her arms around Nora's neck again, squeezing tight, and Nora hugged her back, breathing in strawberry shampoo, and thinking how strange it was that a 7-year-old child had become one of the most important people in her life. When Reese released her and went back to eating, Nora looked at Marcus and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something soft and grateful and maybe a little bit sad. "You don't have to come if you don't want to." Reese gets excited and asks everyone, but there's no pressure. "I want to, honestly. I haven't been to anything like that in years. I'd really like to be there." Something in Marcus's expression shifted, warmth flooding his eyes. "Then we'd love to have you. It's at the community center on Oak Street, Saturday at 2. Fair warning though, there will be a lot of 7-year-olds in tutus and it will be chaotic and possibly painful to watch." "It will not be painful," Reese protested. "We've been practicing for months. We're very good." "You're very good," Marcus corrected. "Some of your classmates are enthusiastic." Reese giggled, a sound like pure joy. "Timothy keeps forgetting the steps. See, chaotic." They talked about the recital for a while, what Reese would be wearing, what dance they'd be performing, how nervous she was but also excited, and Nora felt something unfurling in her chest, something that felt like hope, like possibility, like maybe her life could include things beyond the mansion and her father's neglect and the endless empty hours. But there was a problem, a big one. Saturday afternoon, Nora asked carefully. "What time exactly?" 2:00, Marcus repeated. Because Saturday afternoon was when her father was usually home, rare as that was. Because Saturday was when he sometimes remembered he had a daughter and expected her to be available for the stiff, awkward dinners he occasionally insisted upon. Because Nora couldn't just disappear for hours without him noticing, and if he noticed, he'd ask questions, and if he asked questions, he'd find out about Marcus and Reese, and this entire beautiful secret would come crashing down. But looking at Reese's eager face, at Marcus's hopeful expression, Nora couldn't bring herself to say no. 2:00 is perfect. I'll be there." Reese cheered and Marcus smiled, and Nora ignored the small voice in her head warning that secrets always came to light eventually, and when they did, there was always a price to pay. Nora spent the week planning her escape like a prisoner plotting a jailbreak. That's what it felt like, escaping from a mansion that was supposed to be home, but felt more like a mausoleum, from a father who was physically present but emotionally absent, from a life that had become so small and controlled that attending a child's dance recital required military-level strategic planning. She told her father on Wednesday evening, catching him in the rare hour between when he came home and when he disappeared into his study. Garrett Bishop sat at the head of the dining table, a table that could seat 20 but held only 2, reading something on his tablet while a meal prepared by their chef grew cold between them. "I have plans on Saturday." Garrett didn't look up. What kind of plans Nora had prepared for this, had rehearsed her answer. "A friend invited me to something. I'll need James in the car for a few hours in the afternoon." Now her father looked up, his eyes sharp behind his designer glasses. Garrett Bishop at 68 was still handsome in that cold, polished way of men who spent more time in boardrooms than in sunlight. His hair was graying at the temples, his suits cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing and believed that achievement gave him the right to control everything around him. A friend. He repeated the word like it was foreign. What friend? Just someone I met. Her daughter is in a dance recital. Her daughter. Garrett set down his tablet, giving Nora his full attention for the first time in weeks. How old is this friend? Nora felt her stomach tighten. She should have anticipated this, should have known her father would interrogate her like a suspect. Does it matter? It matters if some stranger is trying to take advantage of you, Nora. You're vulnerable. People see the Bishop name and think opportunity. I'm an easy target, Nora interrupted, anger flaring hot and sudden. That I'm so pathetic and lonely that I'll fall for any scam. Maybe I am lonely, Dad. Maybe if you were actually present in my life instead of hiding in your office, I wouldn't be so desperate for human connection that a 7-year-old child feels like my best friend. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Garrett's face hardened, that familiar wall slamming down the one he'd erected after the accident and never taken down. When he spoke, his voice was cold. I'm trying to protect you. That's all I've ever tried to do. If you can't see that, protect me. Nora's voice cracked. You can't even look at me. You haven't been able to look at me since the accident. Since Mom, don't. The word came out sharp as a blade. Don't bring her into this. But she was already in this, had been in this from the beginning. Catherine was the ghost that haunted every conversation, every stilted dinner, every moment of painful silence between father and daughter. Her absence was the third person at every table, the reason Garrett had buried himself in work, the reason he'd replaced love with money, and presence with distance. I'm going to the recital. I'm going to watch my friend's daughter dance, and then I'm coming home. That's it. That's all I'm asking for. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, and Nora thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain maybe, or regret, or the ghost of the father he used to be before tragedy had carved out his heart. But then he picked up his tablet again, dismissing her. Fine. But James stays with you the entire time, and I want to know the address. It was the best Nora could hope for. She gave him the information, finished her meal in silence, and retreated to her room, feeling like she'd won a battle but lost something important in the process. Saturday arrived with crystalline autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Nora woke early, spent too long choosing what to wear, settled on a simple green dress that her mother would have said brought out the warmth in her skin tone. She did her makeup carefully, not too much, just enough to look alive, to look like someone who was healing instead of barely surviving. James drove her to the community center, and Nora tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. The lobby was packed with parents and grandparents, siblings and friends, everyone clutching flowers and cameras, excitement crackling in the air. Nora navigated her wheelchair through the crowd, hyper-aware of the stares the quick glances followed by looking away. Nora Reese's voice cut through the noise, and suddenly the little girl was there, resplendent in a pink tutu and matching leotard, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that was already starting to come loose. She threw her arms around Nora's neck, careful of the wheelchair. You came. Daddy said you would, but I was worried maybe you couldn't, and I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Marcus appeared behind Reese, looking slightly harried in a button-down shirt that was probably the nicest thing he owned. His hair was still damp, like he'd showered right before rushing here, and he had a bouquet of daisies clutched in one hand. Hey, you made it. The smile he gave her made her chest feel tight and warm and absolutely terrified. Reese disappeared backstage, and Marcus led Nora to the auditorium. They found seats in the third row, close enough that Nora could see the stage clearly. He helped her position her wheelchair in the accessible seating area, then settled into the chair beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. When Reese's group took the stage, Nora felt Marcus tense beside her. And then there was Reese, third from the left, in a line of pink tutus, her face serious with concentration as the music started. She was magical, not perfect. She missed a step turned the wrong way once, but she danced with such joy that perfection didn't matter. Marcus was crying silent tears tracking down his cheeks. When Reese's dance ended, he was on his feet, applauding, cheering louder than anyone else. Nora clapped too, laughing and crying at the same time, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. After the recital, they found Reese backstage. She came running still in her tutu, her face flushed with excitement. Did you see? Did you see me dance? You were perfect. Marcus swept her up, spinning her around. My perfect girl. Can Nora come to ice cream with us? Please. We always get ice cream after recital. Marcus looked at Nora, that question in his eyes again. You're welcome to join us. I'd love to. They went to a small ice cream shop, sat outside at a picnic table in the autumn sunshine. James had followed, parking nearby, a silent guardian. Nora tried to ignore him, tried to pretend this was her real life, but she couldn't quite shake the awareness that she was being watched. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. How much longer? Reality crashed back in. She'd been gone for 3 hours longer than she'd said. I need to go. My dad is expecting me home. Marcus walked Nora to where James was waiting. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Nora felt the air between them charged with something unspoken. See you Tuesday, Nora. Tuesday. As they drove away, Nora looked back to see Marcus and Reese waving. They looked perfect together, father and daughter, a complete unit. Garrett was waiting in the foyer when Nora arrived. You're late, by 30 minutes. The recital ran long. You didn't answer my texts. I was busy watching a 7-year-old dance. Garrett's jaw tightened. Who are these people, Nora? Really? I want the truth. I told you the truth. A woman I met and her daughter. A woman James tells me it was a man and a little girl. Betrayal flooded through Nora. James had told him. Her father was there too because it was his daughter's recital. Normal people have fathers who show up to important events. The barb landed. I'm trying to protect you. There are people who would use you, who would see the bishop name and see opportunity. You're vulnerable, Nora. I'm lonely. That's what I am. I'm desperately, crushingly lonely because my father can't stand to be in the same room with me for more than 5 minutes, because you look at me and see her, see Mom, and you can't handle it. Your mother died because of me. Garrett's voice cracked on the words. Because I wasn't there. Because I was working. Because I chose a meeting over being home and you went out and the accident happened and she couldn't live with it. He was crying now, actually crying. It wasn't your fault. The accident. Mom's death, none of it was your fault. It was all my fault. And I can't lose you too. So if that means being overprotective, if that means asking questions about your friends, then that's what I have to do. For a moment, Nora saw her father clearly, not the cold CEO, but a broken man trying desperately not to break further. The man's name is Marcus Holloway. He's a carpenter, a widower raising his daughter alone. They're kind to me, Dad. They see me as a person. They make me feel less alone, that's all. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Okay, but I want to meet him. This Marcus. If he's going to be in your life, I want to know who he is. Panic spiked through Nora's chest. That's not necessary. It's necessary for me. Invite him to dinner next Saturday. Here. I want to meet the man my daughter is spending time with. Dad, please. Next Saturday, Nora. That's my condition. Either he comes to dinner or you stop going to that bakery. Fine. I'll ask him. That night, Nora texted Marcus around 2 in the morning. My father wants to meet you. He's insisting on dinner next Saturday at my house. I'm so sorry. You can say no. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later. I'm awake. Reese has a cold. Dinner with your dad sounds intimidating, but okay. If it means we can keep having Tuesdays, I'll do it. Nora's eyes burned with tears. Thank you. They texted back and forth for another hour, and when Nora finally fell asleep, it was with the knowledge that in 1 week, everything would change. The following Saturday arrived like a storm Nora had been watching approach for days. She woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety, and spent the morning preparing the mansion for guests in a way it hadn't been prepared in 3 years. The staff moved through rooms that were usually ignored, dusting surfaces that never got touched, arranging flowers in vases that had sat empty since Catherine died. Garrett had insisted on using the formal dining room, of course, the grand room with the table that seated 20, the crystal chandelier that cost more than most cars. The artwork on the walls that whispered wealth and power with every brushstroke. You're going to scare him, Nora said, finding her father in his study that afternoon. Victor was dressed in one of his expensive suits despite this being dinner at home. I'm going to assess him. There's a difference. He's a carpenter dad, a single father trying to raise his daughter alone. He's not some corporate shark. Then he'll have nothing to worry about. Garrett finally looked at her. I'm not trying to ruin your friendship, Nora. I'm trying to protect you. By terrifying the first real friends I've had in 3 years, by making sure they're real friends, that they see you, not the Bishop name." Garrett stood, walked around his desk. For a moment Nora thought he might actually touch her, but he stopped just short. "I know you think I'm being unreasonable, but I've seen what people will do for money, for access, for connection to power. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not again. They're not going to hurt me. They're good people. Just give them a chance, please." "I'll give them a chance. But I'm also going to ask questions. That's non-negotiable." Marcus and Reese arrived exactly at 6, punctual to the minute. Nora watched from the foyer as James opened the front door, watched Marcus's face as he took in the mansion for the first time. She saw the moment reality hit him. This wasn't just a nice house. This was wealth on a scale most people never encountered. "Whoa," Reese breathed, staring up at the chandelier. "Nora, you live in a castle. Not quite a castle, just a big house." "It's beautiful," Marcus said, finding his voice. "It's my father's home. I just live here." Before Marcus could respond, Garrett appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Because of course he did, because he had to make an entrance, had to establish dominance before even saying hello. "Mr. Holloway." Garrett extended his hand. "Victor Bishop." "Mr. Bishop, thank you for inviting us to dinner. Thank you for coming." Garrett's tone was polite but cool. Then his gaze dropped to Reese. "And this must be your daughter." Reese stuck out her small hand with all the confidence of someone who'd never learned that powerful men were supposed to be intimidating. "I'm Reese. I'm 7, and I'm Nora's friend. Your house is really big. Do you have a chandelier in every room?" Despite himself, Garrett smiled, small and brief but genuine. "Not every room, just a few. That's still a lot of chandeliers." "We don't have any chandeliers. We have lamps. Lamps are perfectly good. Chandeliers are mostly for show." He gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we?" Dinner was exactly as awkward as Nora had feared. They sat at one end of the massive table, Garrett at the head, Nora on his right, Marcus and Reese across from her. The meal was elaborate, prepared by their chef, courses arriving with perfectly timed precision that felt more like theater than hospitality. "So, Mr. Holloway," Garrett said once the soup was served, "Nora tells me you're a carpenter." "That's right. Custom furniture mostly. Built-ins, cabinets, that sort of thing." "Interesting." Garrett's tone suggested it was anything but. "And you make a living doing that?" "I do well enough. It's honest work and I enjoy it. I like creating things that last, that people use every day." "Daddy made my bookshelf," Reese added proudly. "It has flowers carved on it, and it's the most beautiful bookshelf in the world. I'm sure it is." But Garrett was looking at Marcus, not Reese. "How did you meet my daughter at Mrs. Thorne's bakery?" "It was Nora's birthday. She was alone. My daughter thought that was unacceptable and asked if we could sit with her." He smiled slightly, glancing at Reese. "I've learned to trust my daughter's instincts about people." "And what are your instincts about my daughter?" Garrett's voice was sharp. "Dad," Nora started, but Garrett held up a hand. "I want to hear his answer." Marcus met Garrett's gaze steadily. "My instinct is that Nora is one of the kindest, strongest people I've ever met. That she's been through more than most people face in a lifetime, and she's still here, still fighting, still trying to find joy where she can. That she deserves friends who see her for who she is, not what she's been through. And that anyone lucky enough to have her in their life should count that as a privilege." The words hung in the air like something tangible. Nora felt tears burning behind her eyes. She looked at Marcus and saw him looking back at her, and for a moment the rest of the room disappeared. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "That's a very diplomatic answer, Mr. Holloway." "It's an honest answer, Mr. Bishop." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting I see a man who's befriended a vulnerable young woman, a wealthy young woman, and I have to wonder about motivations." "Dad, stop." Nora tried to intervene, humiliation burning through her, but Marcus was already responding. His voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "I understand your concern, Mr. Bishop. If I were in your position I'd probably wonder the same things. But I'm not interested in your daughter's money. I'm interested in her happiness. Because she's my friend and friends care about each other's happiness." "Friends," Garrett repeated like he was testing the word. "You're how old, Mr. Holloway?" 42. "And you're spending time with my 22-year-old daughter. You don't find that inappropriate?" The implication was clear, and Nora felt fury rising in her chest. "There's nothing inappropriate about our friendship. Nora comes to the bakery on Tuesdays. We talk, we eat. My daughter adores her. That's it, that's all." Garrett echoed, sitting back. You lost your wife, Nora tells me. Cancer. The abrupt change of subject made Marcus blink. Yes. 3 years ago. That must have been difficult. Raising a child alone. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Some days it still is. And yet you have time for weekly bakery visits with my daughter. That's enough, Dad. You're being rude. I'm being protective. There's a difference. No, you're being cruel. You're sitting here interrogating a good man who's done nothing but be kind to me, who's helped me remember what it's like to have friends, to laugh, to feel like maybe life is worth living. And you're treating him like a criminal because you can't imagine anyone caring about me without wanting something. Nora. She was on a roll now, months of hurt pouring out. You want to know the truth, Dad? The truth is that Marcus and Reese saved me. I was drowning in this house in your grief and mine in the loneliness of being your daughter, but not having a father. I was barely surviving. And then they sat down with me on my birthday and they saw me. Not the wheelchair, not the bishop name, not the tragedy, just me. And they decided I mattered. So if you want to drive them away with your suspicion and your money and your control, then fine, do it. But know that you'll be proving every fear I have that I'm unlovable, that I'm broken, that I'm not worth the effort of connection. Silence fell over the table. Nora was breathing hard, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking in her lap. Reese's small voice broke the quiet. Nora is not broken. She's very lovable. I love her. And Daddy loves her too. As a friend, she added quickly, a very good friend. And you should love her too because she's your daughter, and daughters need their daddies to love them. Nora saw her father's face crumple slightly, saw actual pain cross his features, saw the wall crack just enough to let something human through. I do love you, Garrett said, and his voice was rough, uncertain. Nora, I've never stopped loving you. I just don't know how to show it anymore, how to be close without being terrified of losing you too, so you push me away instead. That's your solution. I don't know what else to do. I failed your mother. I failed you. And I don't know how to fix it. You start by letting me live. You start by trusting that I can make my own choices about who to be friends with. You start by being my father instead of my warden. Garrett looked at Marcus and something passed between the two men, some kind of understanding. Are you a good man, Mr. Holloway? I try to be. I don't always succeed, but I love my daughter. I work hard and I try to treat people with kindness and respect. That's the best I can do. And my daughter, you'll treat her with kindness and respect always. She deserves that and more. Garrett nodded slowly. Okay, you can keep meeting at the bakery. You can be Nora's friend. But I want to be kept informed. I want to know where you're going, who you're with. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need to know you're safe. Can you give me that much? It wasn't perfect. It was still control, still surveillance. But it was also progress. I can give you that, Nora said softly. If you promise to actually be present, to have dinner with me more than once a month, to talk to me like I'm a person, not a problem to manage. I can try. I'm not good at this anymore, Nora, at being a father, at being human. But I can try. That's all I'm asking. They finished dinner in a different atmosphere than they'd started. Still slightly awkward, still careful, but with the worst of the tension diffused. Reese chattered about school and dance classes, blissfully unaware of the emotional warfare that had just taken place, and gradually the adults relaxed into something approaching normal conversation. After dinner, Garrett excused himself, but before he left, he did something that shocked Nora. He stopped beside her wheelchair, hesitated for just a moment, then leaned down and kissed the top of her head. I'm trying, he whispered. I promise I'm trying. And then he was gone. 2 months passed. The Tuesdays continued, each one deepening the connection between Nora and Marcus and Reese. Garrett kept his promise about weekly dinners. They were still sometimes awkward, still required effort from both of them, but they talked, really talked about work and art and grief and hope, about Catherine and the life they'd had before the accident, about the future Nora was building. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Garrett Bishop learned to be a father again. Nora started painting seriously, not just watercolors, but oils, bold, confident strokes. She began selling pieces in a local gallery, started being recognized as an artist in her own right. Marcus's carpentry business grew partly through referrals, partly through a contract with Bishop Technologies that Garrett had quietly arranged, not as charity, but as investment in quality craftsmanship. One Tuesday in early spring, as they sat at their usual table at Thorne's Bakery, Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. Nora's heart stopped. "It's not what you think," Marcus said quickly. "Or maybe it is, but not yet. We're not ready for that yet. Reese needs more time. You need more time. We both need more time to just be together without rushing." "Then what is it?" Marcus opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, delicate and beautiful, with a small stone that caught the light. "It's a promise. A promise that I'm serious about this, about us. A promise that when the time is right, when we're both ready, I'm going to ask you to marry me and be Reese's mother and build a life with us. But for now, it's just a promise that I'm here, I'm committed, and I'm not going anywhere." Nora took the ring with trembling hands, slipped it onto her right hand. "I promise, too. I promise I'm here, I'm committed, and I love you both more than I thought I could love anything." They sat together in the quiet bakery, and Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a lonely girl at a bakery table to a woman with a family, a home, a future worth living for. 1 year after Marcus gave her the promise ring, they got married in that same bakery. Mrs. Thorne closed the shop for the afternoon, and they filled it with flowers and fairy lights and everyone who mattered. Reese was the flower girl, resplendent in a dress she'd picked out herself. Garrett walked Nora down the aisle, rolled her down the aisle because wheelchairs didn't walk, but that was fine, that was perfect. That was exactly who Nora was. James stood as Marcus's best man, because family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about showing up consistently with kindness. The ceremony was short and simple. Vows exchanged in the same spot where Reese had first asked to sit with a lonely birthday girl. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus kissed Nora, and Reese cheered, and everyone applauded, and Mrs. Thorne cried into her apron. Garrett gave a toast that made everyone cry. "I thought I'd lost everything when my wife died. I thought the accident had taken my daughter from me too. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was wrong. Nora never left. I just stopped looking, stopped being present. And I'm grateful every day that she was patient enough, strong enough, brave enough to wait for me to find my way back." He raised his glass. "To family, however we build it. To love that heals. To second chances and new beginnings." The reception was chaotic and perfect, dancing and laughter and cake, so much cake. Nora's wheelchair became part of the celebration rather than a limitation. Reese decorated it with ribbons and flowers. People took turns pushing her around the makeshift dance floor. Marcus lifted her from her chair and held her close while they swayed to music, and she felt weightless and seen and chosen. 6 months later, they sat together at Thorne's Bakery on a Tuesday afternoon. Nora walking with a cane, now after successful physical therapy. Marcus with sawdust still on his jeans from the workshop. Reese now 8 years old and wiser, and a baby boy they'd adopted 3 months earlier, sleeping peacefully in a carrier. Garrett joined them, semi-retired, now spending more time with his daughter and her new family than in boardrooms. Mrs. Thorne brought cake. For the anniversary of the first Tuesday, she said, setting it down with a knowing smile. Then she revealed something Nora hadn't expected. "I've been writing your story, all of it, from that first birthday to today." She handed them a manuscript. When Tuesday came, "What should we do with this?" Nora asked. "Share it," Marcus said simply. "Someone else might need hope like we did." Nora looked around the table at her husband, at Reese, at the baby, who was just beginning to discover the world, at her father, who'd finally learned to be present, at Mrs. Thorne, who'd witnessed it all. "My mother once told me that life is what happens between the plans we make. I planned to survive. Reese taught me to live. Marcus taught me to love. And my father taught me it's never too late to come home. Some people say you can't choose your family, but they're wrong. Family is who shows up. Family is who stays. Family is who sits down at your table when you're alone and decides you matter." And on one Tuesday afternoon, that's exactly what happened to me.